Mornings on ABC Radio Adelaide with Deb Tribe.
At 9 minutes past 10, let's get into workplace safety. I'm very pleased to welcome Margaret Kaukas, Special Counsel in Workplace and Industrial Law at Anderson Solicitors. Margaret, thanks for your time this morning.
That's quite all right. Thanks for having me.
Look, I remember the old days when you couldn't walk past a building site without seeing everybody in a hard hat, just about everybody with hearing protection on and masks in place. Now I'd have to say it's the exception rather than the rule. Am I imagining that, firstly? And has there been a change in workplace safety laws?
Well, I don't know if you're imagining it, but if that's true, it's very disappointing. There has been a change in workplace safety laws. In fact, in 2012, South Australia introduced harmonised laws. Basically, nearly all states in Australia tried to introduce mirror legislation so that there was a consistent approach across the country. And fines were significantly increased. Obligations were significantly increased at that time. So if that's correct, it's very disappointing to hear because the contrary should be the case, given that workplace health and safety laws have been substantially muscled up, if you like, since 2012 when the Work Health and Safety Act was introduced.
Okay, Lyle on the text line is saying the worker might be wearing earplugs rather than the heavy-duty things that I've usually seen, back in the old days. It looked like headphones. So whose responsibility is safety on a building site or on roadworks?
Everybody's. It's the responsibility of the employer. It's the responsibility of any contractors who are working with the employer. It's the responsibility of the workers as well. Everyone involved in a workplace can be prosecuted for failing to comply with their obligations to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety of everybody else. So it's everyone's responsibility, and workers do have the right under the Work Health and Safety Act to refuse to do work if they consider it's exposing them to an imminent risk of harm or injury. And employers can be prosecuted for taking action against workers or discriminating against them if they dismiss them or cause them.
Oh, have we still got you there, Margaret? You just dropped out the last minute there. If they cause damage, did you say?
Sorry. I was saying it's everyone's responsibility in a workplace to look after the health and safety of everybody, and workers do have the right to refuse to do work if they believe that there's a risk to their health and safety.
I'd love to hear from you if you work at a building site or on roadworks, what the general vibe is in relation to health and safety. 1300 222 891 is the number to call, or you can text through on 0467 922 891. Also, if you've got a question for Margaret, call in please on those numbers as well. Margaret, what if you go to a workplace where, and I have seen them because I used to be a lawyer in this field myself, and I've gone up to people that I've seen, a couple of young men I saw recently that were sawing through big concrete stones for roadworks, absolutely covered in white. So nothing on their mouth at all, and no hearing protection on whatsoever with this super loud stone saw. And I went up and said to them, guys, shouldn't you have something on your ears and shouldn't you have something over your mouths? And they sort of shrugged at me and went, no, like as if. So what I guess I walked away worried for them because a lot of these injuries don't arise until years, maybe even decades later when you're talking about hearing loss and lung problems. And so my question is, what if you happen to be at a building site where there is a bit of an attitude, that you're a bit of a wuss if you wear the health and safety gear? Does that happen?
Look, I'm sure it does happen, especially in those industries where there might be, a sort of a macho culture. I'm sure it does happen. I do believe that most workers these days are much more alert to their health and safety. I worry particularly about young workers entering the workforce, that may not feel assertive enough to speak up if they're concerned. But yes, it certainly troubles me immensely. And as I was saying before, and I'm sorry if I hit my mute button by mistake, but workers do have the right to refuse to do work. And certainly if a worker has a concern about something that's happening at their workplace, they can report that to Safe Work, as can anybody, by either calling Safe Work or by going online and making a report. I'm not sure how seriously Safe Work would take a report if it was anonymous, but certainly people should, if they see issues of concern, report it to Safe Work. I think, as well as being the responsibility of everyone on the work side, it's really the community's responsibility to ensure that work health and safety is taken seriously. All of us have the right to come home from work every evening or every morning if you work the night shift. I believe, or I did believe before hearing what you were saying, Deb, that we are starting to take it much more seriously than we have in the past. I would encourage, if anyone does see unsafe work practices, to firstly report it to Safe Work and perhaps also to go to the trouble of contacting the business in question and raising their concerns with them. Because, even if owners of businesses don't care about their workforce, and most of them do, there are always rogue operators, but even if they don't care about their workforce, the fines that can be imposed upon them are significant. The fines can be up to $3 million, and directors can go to jail and have gone to jail in other states for not complying with their work health and safety obligations. I remember when the new legislation came into effect, I was providing training to various boards, and I saw my job at that stage as terrifying these board members because I wanted them to leave the training understanding that their own personal assets and their own personal liberty was at risk if they didn't pay serious attention to the health and safety of their workforce. And as I said, unfortunately, with rogue employers, the hip pocket sometimes can get their attention more than sort of the ethical or moral concerns that should occupy us all.
Well, Margaret, just before we leave Safe Work, Jane from Burnside has sent through a text saying, workplace safety or lack thereof. On construction sites, I believe that Safe Work SA has been seriously under-resourced for some years and now does minimal policing work, let alone any proactive work. So workplace health and safety standards of compliance with the legislation are seriously weakened. Workers and contractors often don't know their rights nor their responsibilities. What's your take on that?
Well, look, I think like many government departments, that's quite correct. If a regulator is under-resourced, then they can't regulate properly. And unfortunately, I think that's probably the case. And so for anyone who's concerned about it, I would encourage you to get active, talk to your local MP. But sadly, I agree with that caller. I think that's probably very true. And so that means that employees or workers in that context are reliant upon their employers or their own knowledge. Trade unions are a valuable resource when it comes to work health and safety. They can assist to establish work health and safety committees. Work health and safety reps can be appointed, and they have considerable power in the workplace if they see unsafe work, and sometimes that makes it easier for an individual worker who may not feel assertive enough to say, hey, I don't think this is safe. If they have a work health and safety committee, then that might make things a little easier. But, I would encourage people to join their local trade union because that will provide them with resources and training. But, yes, I think your caller is absolutely correct, and that's true in many areas of the public sector, sadly.
We are talking to Margaret Kaukas, Special Counsel in Workplace and Industrial Law at Anderson Solicitors. It's 18 minutes past 10. Deb Tribe with you on ABC Radio Adelaide this morning in lieu of David Bevan, who is in the state budget lockup. Andy from Golden Grove has called in. Good morning, Andy.
And hello to your the person you're interviewing there. I didn't catch it.
Margaret Kaukas, yes.
Margaret Kaukas. I'm sorry, Margaret, but you're living in a dream. You are talking as if you are talking to a politician in North Terrace there and just reaffirming what he wants to hear or she wants to hear. But I would say I was in the building game myself for 40 years. I know people, I've got relatives that are still in it, and it is a shambles. I'll bet you could go to any of the multi-story building sites in town and you will not find a safety officer. Never mind somebody to report an incident to. I also believe that the industry is rife with young people and not so young people that are just going to work whacked out of their brains.
Okay, right? Andy. Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say that when I was in it, it was called the BLF and all that. Oh, they're terrible. But they got the bosses to do things and sit up and pay attention.
Okay, thanks,
Andy. I'm sure you're correct. I'm talking about what the law provides, and I certainly accept that what the law provides is not always translated to what occurs on the shop floor. So, I don't profess any expertise of what goes on building sites. As a lawyer, I can talk to you about what the law provides, but as I've said, it is difficult sometimes for individuals, and I certainly, as I said earlier, would encourage people to join their local trade unions because in those sorts of situations, then that is probably the best way to get the information and the change that might be needed in your workplace.
Well, let me throw some questions at you, Margaret, that are coming through on the text line. Josh asks, what happens if the employee refuses to wear masks, eye and ear protection?
Well, they can be disciplined and dismissed. And I tell you, the Fair Work Commission, if someone is dismissed and brings an unfair dismissal claim, the Fair Work Commission does not look kindly on workers who fail to comply with safety obligations. Although, as Andy was saying, and I accept that that the law may not translate all the way to every workforce, but in terms of the law when it's applied in tribunals, work health and safety is seen as very, very high on the list of priorities. So if a worker refuses to comply with safety rules and is dismissed, then they would get very short shrift from the Fair Work Commission if they tried to challenge the dismissal.
Okay, just a few more questions your way. This one says, is there an anonymous number people on building sites can call for dodgy practices? Workers are running scared because in many cases bosses are a protected species and workers can be weeded out without consequence. Well, I'd also say to that, jobs are thin on the ground. So people do not want to put themselves in the situation where they may jeopardise their employment. So what's the answer to that question, Margaret?
I absolutely understand that, and there are numbers that you can call Safe Work. As I've said, I don't know how Safe Work would deal with an anonymous complaint. My experience with clients who've said they've made anonymous complaints to Safe Work is that Safe Work isn't interested. But I may be wrong, and I don't want to say something about Safe Work that isn't accurate. I'll simply say I don't know how they would deal with an anonymous complaint. And you're quite correct. As a lawyer, one of the difficulties we have is I might say to someone who calls me, well, if you get sacked, we can sue them, but that's no solace to someone who's got a family to feed, is it? And the reality is that although there is legislation to protect against action taken against workers for raising health and safety issues, an employer can be prosecuted under the Work Health and Safety Act and fined up to $500,000. The employee can bring a general protections claim in the Fair Work Commission. Again, I accept that that's a long way from the shop floor, but the fact is that there are remedies available if workers speak up about health and safety and are then discriminated against or have action taken against them. I would just advise them to seek legal advice. But again, the law is a long way from the shop floor, so I accept that doesn't help you with the incidents as they arise.
That's right.
And again, and I suppose the only practical advice I can give to people in that situation is join your union, because your union can hopefully achieve things that you as an individual can't.
Well, Sal says, how about men on the roof without protection? I have seen many. And by that, I think, not tethered at all in any way. Charles at St Agnes says, my son-in-law was sacked after reporting unsafe removal of old lead-based paint without appropriate PPE. Reported it to Workplace Services. They came out to investigate. He was sacked the next day for another trumped-up reason. He was happy to leave because there were a lot of other unsafe practices and got a new job a few days later. Pleased to hear that had a happy outcome, Charles. This says lung disease cause I think that's meant to be caused by sand and concrete dust, is silicosis. Larry says, house built in 1963 being demolished, very strong possibility of asbestos in the eaves. Rang council, no longer their responsibility. Told to ring SA Health, no longer their responsibility. Told to ring SafeWork SA, and after waiting considerable time on hold to speak to someone, reluctantly looked up at the information and informs me, sorry, the screen's just refreshed, no asbestos notice lodged, and perhaps ring the demolition company. So, as Larry's saying, whose responsibility is it to police this? Surely not the demolition company. Who plays the ferryman? That's slightly a different issue, but certainly a very big issue for workers who might be demolishing that workplace, and for people that live around them.
Responsibility. It's SafeWorks' responsibility. I mean, employers are supposed to keep an asbestos register, and it's SafeWorks' responsibility to police that. But, you know, again, we come back to that issue of resourcing, and if our governments don't resource regulators sufficiently, they're limited in the regulation they can do, sadly.
Pat worries about the health and safety of farmers who seem to take way too many risks. Pat, I think there'd be strong agreement with that. This says this attitude is really bad in the residential building industry, and most builders bully tradies into working in situations they most probably should not. Jono at Port Noarlunga says there will be nurses doing double shifts today. Sorry, this is on a different issue really. 16 hours straight, giving out medication and making health assessments of their patients. Quite true. As a homeowner, I mention safety gear to all of my tradies. Very few use it. So it looks like I'm not alone in seeing this around. I'm getting lots of texts that are saying the same thing. So at the end of the day, what you're saying to us is we can ring if we want to name ourselves as a bystander, but, you know, who knows what trouble we might get the workers into, or whether there will be a fine issued. I don't know. It sounds like the law and practice seem to have a bit of a chasm between them at the moment, Margaret.
Yes, well, it's very unfortunate if what you're saying and what your listeners are saying is the case. Very disappointing. I mean, I'm usually stuck in my office, so I guess I don't see it as much as other people do. But yes, and it's not unusual that there is a gap between the law and it's filtering down. Now, this legislation was introduced in 2012, but it was introduced in 2014, and you would have thought that by now there would have been some impact on the shop floor, so to speak, but it's very disappointing to hear that that's not the case. The mechanisms are there. It perhaps comes down to an issue of resourcing, which is an issue, as I've said, for many public sector agencies.
Well, we'll see what comes out of today's state budget. You never know. There might be some money for that. But Margaret Kaukas, I know you're very busy, so thank you very much for taking this time out to talk to us about the issue of workplace safety. We appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Margaret Kaukas, Special Counsel in Workplace and Industrial Law at Anderson's Solicitors.